Hey guys, what's up? It's Lizzy Jane. We're back with another week of the Lizzy Jane podcast. This week, I have the one and only Jason Ross joining me. He has just been absolutely killing it. You may know him from his early days on Anjunabeats to now he's part of the Ophelia Records family. He just finished his absolute most insane headline tour to date following his sophomore album, the Atlas album. We talk about so much. This was just such a lovely conversation. For new viewers here coming from Jason Ross's fan base, welcome. He is such a lovely human, and I hope you guys take the time to explore the podcast. I have podcasts with Trivecta and Blanke and Last Heroes and so many more of the Ophelia family members. This was such a joy. Don't forget, we have this podcast ad-free only on my Patreon. I offer group lessons, one-on-ones, so on and so forth at www.patreon.com/this is Lizzy Jane. And I hope you guys are having a beautiful week. Let's get to it. You're tuning into my podcast with special guest Jason Ross.
The show today was brought to you by Vitaplur E-Boost Gum. With no pill to take or powders to mix, Vitaplur E-Boost Gum is a first-of-its-kind energy rave supplement that provides magnesium, electrolytes, and antioxidants while you chew. Vitaplur is the perfect complement to my active lifestyle, whether it's at the festival, on the road touring, or hitting the gym. Chew Vitaplur and dance with confidence. Use code LizzyJane for 10% off any order.
Jason Ross, oh my gosh, welcome to the Lizzy Jane podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And just as we were discussing before, your life has been quite the conundrum as of lately. So busy.
Yes. Yeah. Since the pandemic, I think it was, yeah, you're right. It was nonstop. Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like from your debut album into just the whirlwind of tours that you were a part of, everything with Ophelia Records to doing one-off stops with Nightmare and Slander and so on and so forth, into your second sophomore album, and then in 2022 doing the Atlas tour, which was just absolutely massive.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not stopping, which is great. Always keeping busy. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I would love to first off just say that you've really kind of paved this path as people who are familiar with Jason Ross, or you're just getting to know him here on the podcast. You know, I know that your discography really just spans amongst a huge variety of subgenres in electronic dance music. You've always kind of not kept yourself in that one box, one lane, whether it's, oh, I'm only trance, oh, I'm only melodic dubstep, oh, I'm only prog house. Is that something when you kind of started to create the Jason Ross project that was going to be at the forefront, or did you just take your like creative influences and inspirations as they came to you? Like, I would love to know about the beginning of your project and like what your intentions were to what you're doing now. And it's just like this journey that your sets kind of take you on in all these different directions and all of these different emotions and feelings.
Yeah. I think it was kind of like the latter of what you were saying, that my creative influences kind of inspired me to try new things. But kind of rewinding back, it kind of, what got me into this music was like trance and, Anjunabeats and Above and Beyond, that whole thing. Like in college, I was like, I guess being more open to, I guess even rewinding back even further, I first heard, I don't know, ATB Till I Come in like early 2000. And I was living in Minnesota. Nobody was listening to dance music. It wasn't a thing back in the day, but I had just come about this song, and then hearing other like, what was it called? Like, these radio hits, like these dance hits. For some reason, my ears just perked up when I heard anything that involved these emotional melodies that you wouldn't hear on the radio. Like Every Time We Touch, like, as cheesy as it sounds, like these are the things that perked my ears at a young age. And then fast forwarding to college, I was like hearing more dance music. This is like 2007, 2008. I ended up going to like some fraternity party, and there was this DJ playing progressive trance. And that was like my first time hearing a set, like a DJ set with this kind of music. And I reached out to this guy. I was like, who was that guy? Who was that DJ? You know, and he ended up being like a mentor of mine. He got me into like the DJ scene in San Diego. So trance was like always my thing that I was always like gravitating to. And, then hearing, going even digging even deeper, I found Anjunabeats and Above and Beyond, their group therapy podcast. And that's when I was like, that's the kind of music I want to make. It was like, I want to be on Anjunabeats. I want them to play my music on their podcast. Um, and that was kind of like my mission, my goal, getting into production was to like make trance music that could be played by Above and Beyond. That's where it all started. And then, fast forwarding, meeting Jeff Seven Lions and hearing that, melodic dubstep, which was kind of like trance inspired dubstep, that's kind of what brought me into making more, I guess, like broadening my palette of breaking outside of trance, but keeping that emotional melody that that got my ears perked at like when I was 11 years old. So it was always just like this natural curiosity of hearing new influence and being inspired by that. But also, you can probably tell from my discography, the sound hasn't really changed. The only thing that's really changed is like the tempo and the rhythm, but the emotional um, feeling and the melodies, I think, have always stayed true to like what I love as an artist and what I love as like a fan of this music. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like whenever I think of Jason Ross, it's like an accumulation of exactly what you just said. It's kind of like the same theme and motif in like every body of work where it's this combination between very strong melodies, harmonies, so on and so forth, and very strong vocalists that you choose to work with that push that like driving factor home in each and every single EP album. Given that, I think we're in this very weird time where I I believe that Ophelia has paved this path, like just what you said with Seven Alliance, where it's keeping the melodic influence and it's keeping these song structures full and whole. And it's not necessarily intelligent dance music, but it's definitely not four on the floor root note dubstep. And it's like this very beautiful combination of things. And that's why I think yourself, Sam, Trivecta, Last Heroes, Crystal Skies, all of those guys, Blanke, JP, have just really created music that have such a longer shelf life compared to, I would say, the average dubstep or the average melodic dubstep track. And a lot of the conversations that I have now with other colleagues and other A&Rs and industry professionals is so much of how do we, keep the realness of the music and keep the melodies driving while producing on a DAW that causes you to sound sometimes very robotic or repetitive or very so much in a box. I know that understanding music theory and understanding, major, minor, augmented, diminished chords are not a necessity to be a producer, but it definitely fucking helps you. Did you have previous music training? Did you play instruments? Like, did you have music theory background that you brought into trance and furthermore into melodic dubstep?
Um, that's a good question. So no, I
Okay.
don't really have. Well, I don't have that music theory where I'm like thinking, oh, I want to, work in like a diminished, triad, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I think what's kind of brought me to here is hearing, listening. Um, for one, I played the saxophone, so I guess there is a little theory, and I think playing the sax, which is like a, just like a mono lead, like it's like playing on silent, just one note at a time. Like I think that kind of gave me the tools and the experience, and that ear to listen for melodies. So, and to kind of create my own melodies. Um, so there is that part where I think I've was able to create melodies that just by having that experience of playing an instrument. But
Mhm.
when it comes to like full, like making pads and chords and stuff like that, I'm kind of just using my ear. So I'll have like a session, I'll open Ableton and, bring on like an Omnisphere, string pad and just start playing on my keyboard, maybe playing some root bass notes and then adding, making a chord out of it. Um, and I'll kind of just build it off of that. But a lot of it just comes to my, I guess, intuition of what sounds good to me. Um, it usually always starts with like a chord progression and then it builds off of that. But I won't, but if I have a chord progression that I don't really jive with, I'll probably just scrap it. So everything kind of builds off of like, having that core progression melody that I resonate with. If I don't, I probably won't finish the track or I'll start over. Yeah. So I think it's just all ear for me.
I I think that a lot of people get lost in like the technicalities and like the technical aspects and whether you're mixing as you go and you're gain staging and you're post processing, and it really all does come down to that. I don't know if you've ever done mentorship or just, taught elementary production students, but a lot of the times it's so much of, you know what, if it sounds good, go with it. Like it doesn't always have to be technically right. It doesn't always have to be, sitting at -6 at your highest maximum peak and just having that musical influence. And I know obviously trance definitely helped influence that because trance is just such a, as far as electronic dance music genres, is definitely one of the most melodic genres out there in terms of bending arpeggios and melodies and building saws and all so on and so forth. So going into your creative process, is that really how you just start to create these beds of music for, your albums? Like was like looking back at your albums, A Thousand Faces, your debut album, Into Atlas, your sophomore album, listening through, they do have a lot of those same motifs and sounds. However, it just seems like it's this more mature, developed overall feeling between both albums. And do you test that to just your maturity as an artist and you figuring out things as it goes and as time goes on? Or did you go into each album with a different creative influence and a different creative process?
Um, I kind of figured it out as I went on, but um, I think just when I started to make A Thousand Faces, it was kind of like that time where I was like kind of wanted to somewhat make a statement of like, this is who I am. You know, some of you may know me from trance, some of you may know me from, Ophelia and melodic dubstep. Um, but I felt like that was a good time to like showcase this is who I am. My, like you said, like my more matured version of me, my more evolved. I felt like I had a good sense of who I was at that time. That I thought this is a good time to showcase who I am as an artist. And then starting to work with vocalists. That was also a new thing for me because if you see my discography, I think like most of my Anjunabeats releases were instrumental songs, purely melody driven songs, and then getting to evolve out of that. And I saw that a lot of melodic dubstep had these vocals. You heard a lot of like Seven Lions with working with Halion and Fiora and all this stuff. Um, that was definitely something that I felt I wanted to explore also. Um, so working on the album gave me an opportunity to start to have these writing sessions with people, which was a really great experience because I learned so much just about making a song that doesn't just have like this amazing melody, but also has like this theme behind it. So it's almost like another layer of a song um, for like fans to connect with. Because for me, I connect. At least I did connect originally with melodies, um, and I think the vocals and lyrics were always kind of like an afterthought for me,
Hmm.
just because that's just what I gravitated to. Um, but now to then have this experience writing vocals and working with these vocalists and writers, for one, it's given me a huge appreciation for what they do. But for another, it's like it's made me look at songs in a totally different way. Um, that melody isn't everything. I think um, having a good vocal, I think there's a lot of value to that as well for people to connect to, for people to connect with, but also for me to connect with my own music in a deeper way than I've never really felt before.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I feel like exactly what you said. Sometimes just from like a producer's point of view, it's difficult for a melody to really coexist with a very strong vocal that's kind of jumping an array of octaves, or she's belting and then she's in her kind of alto era and all and so on and so forth, and then you put vocal stacks and harmonies and all of that stuff, and I think it goes from so much of kind of having the song exist in its own universe to shaping a song around a very important element that's going to drive it home. And for so many consumers, and like obviously, I'm sure you have kind of sat back and evaluated your journey, whereas, the Juana Beats journey and portion of your career compared to a lot of the songs now that have Haleen and have Dia Frampton and have these very strong vocalists. I'm sure that's what so many of your fans really attach themselves to. Those hooks, those melodies that are driven through the vocals, and whether it goes from the song name into the chorus into the pre-drop vocal, that vocal can really, from a consumer standpoint, take the forefront of how regular fans of electronic dance music and of music in general remember the songs. I remember kind of getting into electronic dance music, and when I was 17, 18, and going, okay, well, none of this is really on the radio except for stuff like Every Time We Touch, except for stuff that has those hooks and has those vocals that are, for most people now that have a very short attention span, that's what they're remembering. That's what's making the song a hit. And I think it's really cool now too, where, you still have songs that balance out the vocally driven singles or singles of your albums that you're releasing. And then you can still have songs that really focus on the instrumentation and the melody. Because sometimes I think when you don't have that balance, maybe, I don't know, as yourself now, do you feel artistically fulfilled? Like, do you feel like your current discography and your albums, are you making every bit of music that you have a desire to make currently within the Jason Ross project?
Good question. Um, I do feel fulfilled. I think it was a challenge at first for me creatively to like, go into writing with vocals. Um, because for so long, my melodies would, to me, feel like the vocal. Um,
Mhm.
there would be like a lead, but now it's kind of like taken, replaced with like a vocal. There is a way to kind of make them work like together, but I think like um, making sure that the vocal has their own space um, has definitely become more important for me. Of like not overcomplicating it. I think for me, I could like put a vocal over a lead over a vocal, and to me that would sound great. But I think to most of the people, it would sound like, where's the focus?
Mhm.
Is it the lead? Is it the vocal? Like what? So I think there's definitely been like a lesson in holding back, of like doing too much. Um, but I definitely like it. It definitely feels like the right thing. The thing is, w- I won't do something if I don't feel creatively fulfilled. And I think, you know, I think you can see it from the discography. Like it's never been, um, it always kind of feels like me. Um, you know, even like playing hardstyle in my EDC set, to me, that felt natural and it felt right and it felt authentic. Um, so yeah, it definitely was like uh, something that I had to kind of really dive into and figure out like how does this work for me. Um, but I definitely feel like I'm at a good place where um, I can do all of the things, and even like if I make a song that may be more radio friendly or stream friendly, I can always just write another Anjunabeats tune that's an instrumental. Um, for example, I have one coming out in I think a month. That's just a
Exciting.
fully instrumental song on Anjunabeats. So definitely to have that creative freedom is really nice for me. That I can like I don't have to work on one style forever. I can kind of like do whatever. That really is creatively freeing for me.
And I think that's a learning lesson really attested to how you established your project in a sense because you've released so across the board for so long that when you put out something it's not this left field, oh wow, this is new, this is exciting, but maybe the whole fan base may not be on board with it. And and that's always okay. I think that artists should always be encouraged to keep evolving their sound, keep doing what makes them feel artistically happy. But the fact that you do feel fully artistically fulfilled in everything that you do, I think is one, amazing, and two, something that a lot of professional musicians and touring producers don't always have the pleasure of saying. I've spoken with quite a few people who say, it's almost like a diet. It's like the 80-20 rule. Like I make 80% of what I know is going to fit in the pocket that my fan base loves. And then I get to use the other 20% to do weird left end stuff, whether it's hard style or experimental bass or down tempo that makes me feel like I'm continuing to challenge myself. And that kind of spark that you have when you start making music of, wow, this is amazing and fun and new. And I don't want to put it down. And this doesn't feel like a job. But I think that now more than ever, a lot of new artists, especially Ophelia artists, Wanna Beats artists, I mean, just across the board that I've been seeing on Dinmock, on Thrive, these labels are starting to diversify their discography of artists that they're bringing on via, artist and repertoire to encourage artists not to just fit in that pocket. Cause I've watched artists like Ricky, like Nitty Gritty, from day one, he was like, I'm doing everything. And he's one of the most talented producers that I know. But it was so hard. He said it was so hard for his fan base to get on board because it was like, am I a bass DJ? Am I Jersey House or am I Jersey Club? Am I doing, Bass House on Chami's label? He would have a release on Dimmock and then Confessions and then Thrive and then, some bass label. And it was always so amazing. But he said it was just such an uphill battle. And I feel like Ophelia and Wannabeats has always created that space for such a diversified selection of artists to do whatever the hell they want and be supported in that lane. And so much of it is that like less is more conversation, where as I've always said, if you can make dubstep, you are one of the most, and when I say dubstep, I mean kind of like musically driven, melodic driven, that whole Ophelia lane, you, Seven Lions, Blanke. It's a very difficult genre to master. And if you can master that, everything from the composition standpoint to mixing down to mastering it to handing it off all in your studio, you can really tackle a lot. And then I tried to write pop music, and pop music is a totally different, lane where you can overcomplicate and finding that like happy point, that 99 to 100% done point in pop music when your head just goes, should I be adding more here? Shouldn't there be more elements? Why is this track so few tracks, but why is it not showing full on box band or on my spectrum analyzer? That's a whole nother aspect in itself. So when you started working with vocalists, I know it was definitely an adjustment, but did that change your creative process? Would you start writing a track with a vocalist in the room, or are you always going to create a bed of music before you send it off to a vocalist that you would like to work with, or you're pitching it out?
It's always different. Like I would just naturally have a lot of instrumentals, when I was first getting into this, that I would then send out to vocalists.
Mm-hmm.
Just be like, it was very like black and white. Like, here's a song, send it to them, hope to get something back. But then I started to realize that there's kind of like a disconnect between the producer and the vocalist when it's just very transactional of like, here's a song, all right, go do your thing, and then see if it makes sense for you as an artist to release it. So yeah, but as I've gotten more into writing with vocalists, I've done a lot more in sessions with them.
Mm-hmm.
Just yesterday, I had a couple writers over at my place and working on a new thing. But it's kind of evolved into not sending them a full-fledged instrumental. It's more of like there's musical beds, there's maybe like piano and string, to kind of just get, because I've learned that writers feel a little more constricted when there's already a song made.
Mm-hmm.
It's like then they try to figure out, how do I fit into this already made thing, versus when you send them something that's very stripped, piano, string, it gives them more of an opportunity to, well, if the instrumental is not in the right key for them, then it's like, okay, well then I have to go back
So much work,
repitch the song.
mm-hmm.
And that's, who knows if I've like already frozen several tracks in the project that I then need to go to the older project and get the VST running. So, and also a pro with using just like a stripped melody bed is you can make it faster, you can make it slower, you can pitch it up, pitch it down. There's a lot less variables in doing that. Just yesterday, for example, just because it's fresh on my mind, I had a few melodies that I was showing them and they liked this one. We then were like, okay, great. Is it in the right range for you? Yes, no. Okay, pitch it up, down. Is this a good tempo? There's a lot more freedom to then I can go back and, just move that piano MIDI up or down a semitone or whatnot. But yeah, so it started with instrumentals, as you could probably imagine, just me making instrumentals daily, to then getting a melodic bed. Or we get in the situation where my management or my publisher gets top lines that I listen to, that I really connect with. And then boom, then I kind of make the song around the vocal. So it really is just a case by case kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I feel like when you guys are working together, they are considered a full on collaborator. And I think that it was a very hard adjustment for, I think, certain lanes of producers to realize that vocalists are just as important to the song, whether they're writing or you have a collaborative writer in the room and then you have the vocalist on top of it, as anything else, because they're really driving home the theme of the song, and they're really driving, they're just so important. And like, speaking with vocalists that, do predominant vocals, like Haleen and Soundar and Danny King and all of those, even to people like Evan Gia that have done features but have really decided to push their own discography through those opportunities of working with, Millennium and What's So Not and so on and so forth to create their own project. And now they're performing on their own. It's really awesome to see just the electronic dance music community grow in the fact of saying, okay, it's not just us. And I think that was a stigma that when I first came into, when I was 19, 20, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I need to take my musical background and adjust it to learning a DAW. There were so many people that were like, it's kind of like a one man deal for a while. You're really like in this 4 wall, 5 wall room working with yourself, learning and improving and X, Y, and Z. And coming from a band background, I'm so used to art being like a collaborative effort. And I'm so in the mindset that the more people there are, maybe it may be harder to agree on something to really stick with, but you're going to have more of an opportunity window to get better ideas and bounce ideas off of each other and so on and so forth. And I feel like that's so much of what, vocalists serve. And even now, I feel like when I collaborate with other artists, if you have the opportunity to, working in the same room brings out so much more, even if you're doing kind of like the roundabout where it's 1 hour in a chair, the other person's planning what they're doing, you switch it off, you get in the next chair and they're planning what they're doing, or you're side by side and writing the song together. You just have that energy in the room that you're not going to get by communicating over email or even communicating over Zoom.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it wasn't until I started to do these sessions in person that I had so much of a, respect and appreciation for what they do. Cause for so long, it just was like, it felt so separated.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh yeah, you guys just write your thing and send it back and we'll see if like we like it or if we can make improvements or something. But it's such a different muscle that when you're in the studio and you come in with a blank slate of like maybe just like a piano and you're with the writer, you're with the vocalist, um, and you just get so much of a better uh, product in the end. Like a better song that like means something to me too. Like the song we wrote yesterday, there's things that I took from my life experience that kind of was fused into the theme of the song. But also just to like see them, you know, arrange these words into some kind of song structure. It just like blows my mind. It's something that I just can't do on my own. So just like getting that one-on-one or like experience to just be in the room with them made me realize how much they do, I bring to the table in terms of making a song that people can relate to on a deeper level than even like melodies can, you know?
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel like not necessarily, I think in EDM, you're expected to have this huge musical output. But when you start working on, I would say there's like, I talked to somebody sometime that I can't remember who it was, but they said that they write like pieces of like bodies of art, like real records, and then they have tracks. Like they'll have like real records where they're working with an artist and they're working with a vocalist or they're collaborating, and it can take up to, sometimes years, sometimes a few months, as far as sessions, making sure everybody's on the same page, getting it to a point where you're like, yes, this is it. And then you have tracks that you can write overnight and they're instrumental and you're like, I'm ready to go. It's done. I'm happy with it. You have been touring kind of all over the place since COVID kind of opened its gates and you've been out of them. How has running these sessions, working with vocalists, considering, a lot of your tracks off your last 2 albums have been, in my opinion, lifetime records and things that have obviously shown like huge time spent on each piece of art going into each album, and balancing touring at the same time? Are you someone who writes on the road? Are you someone who you do a tour and then you have to take months off to work? How has it gone since you've been really full-fledged out of the gates in the end of 2020, 2021?
It's funny you bring that up because I think it's something that's really relevant to my life right now. Like as a producer of like, I put so much time into my songs. especially when it's a vocal, especially when it's like more of like a something that maybe is a little more stream friendly.
Mm-hmm.
But even like on the album, every song I think um, had like every song was very polished, and I think that's like, and I guess how it's relevant now is like I also want to try to make songs that could maybe just be DJ tools that I could just like play on my own or have, because I see so many other guys like dubstep guys or like, you know, guys that say like, "Oh, I made this in my green room last night and I'm playing it today at this show."
Right.
I'm just like, and I'm looking, I'm like, uh, that's not like, it's not what I do. I would love to like be able to just bang out a track in a day, in a night and like play it tomorrow, which I essentially could, but I wouldn't really want to because it's just like music for me takes time
Mm-hmm.
for at least the music that I make. Um, yeah, but that's like something like that I do think about. Like, I also want to be able to have things that I can play for like a live show. Um, that maybe doesn't take as much time as most of my music does. Otherwise, because it just doesn't make sense. If I have a song that's like a DJ tool to play live, and I just put in like 100 hours into it or plus, or worked in it for a month straight, it just doesn't really seem like a good use of my time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I actually did like a little experiment the other day of making a hard style song. Uh, and I was like, oh, I could just make this really quick out. Let me just see how this sounds. I ended up working on it for like 2 weeks straight. Um,
Yeah.
Thinking like it was going to be an easy DJ tool, like, oh, it'll just be like an ID that I play live and we'll think nothing of it. And I'll just move on to the next song. But it's like, I always just end up spending so much time on my music.
That's not a
Um,
bad thing.
it's not a bad thing. And I know other guys do that too. I know like, um, there's so many other guys. I think Flume also, like, I think he spends months and, a lot of these guys spend a lot of time on the music. But I think there is something about, maybe making songs that have, maybe like breaking that. Um, I don't know. I think it's just something that I have to either accept that like music just takes me a long time, or something that I can maybe like work on, um, and break the mold of like having needing every song to be perfect. Um, that's something that's why it's relevant because I'm thinking about that now. I just finished an album. I want to be able to maybe try things for fun,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like no matter what, I always end up wanting to make it perfect. I don't know. Something I'm working on.
It's hard. I mean, I'm obviously in a much different place than you are, but I think that spans across the board because it's like you're putting this piece of you out there, even if it's just a one off hard style song. And I think the biggest thing from my kind of mental hurdles have been, you want to give your fans and you want to give your supporters and people who have invested in you as a person and you as a musician like the best of yourself that you possibly can. And not necessarily when you've set such a high standard. I just think when you've been doing it for as long as you have and you've honed the craft of the Jason Ross project, that's part of like your entity. That's part of like the building blocks that you've kind of gone across because it's the same thing. I've literally been at festivals and watched people like Sudden Death, watch people like Dirt Monkey just finish tracks, export it, put their master chain on it. Then they're on stage in front of like 40,000 people just playing out this track. And as much as I wish I could be that way, and what maybe it's lack of skill set, maybe I'm not to that point yet. It's hard for me to not take time to let a song breathe. But I think there's like the cons and the pros to that because the cons is art, you know, and like however, whatever art you make, you should be able to let it out into the world and let your fans or listeners interpret it and relate to it how they want. But the pro of it is when you let a song breathe, I think that, you know, being done with something and going to listen to it on fresh ears, you know, 2 weeks later, a month later, gives you that whole new perspective as if you're showing the song to somebody for the first time. And I think if you like, it's so hard because in EDM, you're definitely expected to, I think, release faster than slower just to keep that, you know, momentum going or your relevance going or whatever they say. But then the other end of it is, I think there's definitely a conversation to be had where a lot of electronic dance music tracks have little to no shelf life unless they blow up on TikTok or they're in, you know, or you get a big publishing deal and then that may not even really affect your project as a whole as a touring act. That's more like, great, this is a great check. It got slotted in a commercial, it got slotted in a movie or a video game. That's it. But, you know, are people going to like turn around and say like, wow, this is my favorite song ever? And I think looking through your fan base and the community that has been created following your music, whether it's from Ophelia or Wanna Beats or just people following you in general, is some of their favorite music is from your discography. And I don't think that a lot of artists have just hundreds of people who are like, this song is it. This is what I feel in my soul. This is what I connect to. This is what I put on when I'm sad. This is what I put on when I'm happy. Like to encompass all of those feelings and put something out into the world that's going to stay. I just think now more than ever is so important. And it takes time to hone that craft to be like, to know when something is ready. Because I think from an artist point of view, it'll never feel like ready. There was always something that you can do to tweak something more.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's like what you were saying about like, everything is just going so fast, and you know, you put out a song and then people are 2 weeks later they want something else. Like there's just so much music, so oversaturated. And I think that's where like my mind went of like, oh, I need to just be making more music. And yeah, but I think what you were saying of like the shelf life, like I do want my music to feel timeless. I do want my music to feel like not just something I threw together in a day, you know. Yeah, and I think I just have like a high expectation of myself as a producer of not wanting to just put out a song that people will forget in a week. Um, and I think like it's probably just like a different style of music that like I think dubstep, I think um, people can make IDs a lot quicker. Like where because it's bass, you know, it's like not to like say anything bad about, you know, I have a lot of respect for Danny, Sudden Death, and all those guys that are making these crazy IDs that like I can't
Super
even
innovative.
my head around.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of just like goes, you know, it's like feels 3D almost, like the way that they can sound design. It's wild. But I think that just might be more of the culture of having 10 IDs ready
At all times.
At all times. Like, whereas I think making these melodies that I think, you know, I think just think it's, I don't know, like it's hard for me to like put a song idea out on Twitter and just be like, check this out. Like, you know, I think it's just a different culture. But I think also maybe the other part is myself, maybe just like, feeling like everything needs to be perfect. Um, you know, not so much premeditated, you know, in terms of social media. Um, but I think like my music, I don't know, I just, maybe that's just me coming from the Anjunabeats side where, you know, there were such high standards of, you know, perfection. And I think that kind of also why I felt like the natural move was going to Ophelia. I just think they have a very similar high standard of music. You know, getting into it, getting my first opportunity to release on Anjunabeats, I was like, oh man, I got to go up against Above and Beyond and Andrew Bear and Elon Bluestone, like these guys I would look up to. And I was like, man, I really got to like step it up. Because for them, like that was like that music that they put out on that label. It just like, I saw it in just such like a high, um, it was just like a huge goal of mine for so long that then when I had the opportunity, I was like, man, I really gotta step it up. And then, working with Jeff, all these guys I had looked up to as a producer. Um, so I think feeling like I need to be on that level, I think made me really, um, try hard to not just make something that could just pass the smell test kind of thing, but something that
Yeah.
it could stand on its own, uh, amongst these, to me, like legends of this kind of music. So I think that's maybe part of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that definitely isn't a testament to, your collaborations with Jeff, with Gryffin, with Slander, with these guys who have really held the same standard for a very, very long time. And speaking of Ophelia, how was I would love to know about the transition of when you knew it was the right time. Were you very close with Jeff personally? I feel like the whole Ophelia train I really saw coming during COVID when you guys did those live streams. And that's when because Sam used to live when I was in Florida a mile from me. So watching him, I mean, go from like being a part of the Ophelia family to what he's doing now, which I mean, it was a long time coming. Anyone who knows him knows he's just the sweetest fucking human ever. And he has such like a unique lane, but like Ophelia really put him on. And I feel like you had already had kind of your own lane going with Anjunabeats and you could have continued down that lane. What was the moment when you knew, okay, this is the right move for me? This is the group of people that I want to continue kind of being in that little lunch table with, but still doing my own thing because it's not all with Ophelia Records, even though like that is your home. You do have like this other entity in your project that still does stuff with Ohana, that still does stuff, independently or with other labels.
Yeah, I think there's like two parts there to
Okay.
your question. I think the first part is transitioning from Anjunabeats into Ophelia. I think it was more like, I think 2017, 16 actually. I don't know, whenever Group Therapy 250 was at the Gorge.
Okay.
Uh, well, so Jeff and I had made a song on Anjunabeats while I was still on Anjunabeats, like a staple. Um, we made a song called Higher Love. Um, and it was the first time I think dubstep was released on Anjunabeats, like a dubstep drop. So, and that's the first time I made any kind of melodic dubstep. Uh, and it was really well received. Above and Beyond would be playing it all the time and stuff like that. And then, um, I think he had joined my management. So we had the same management just out of the blue. It's like, oh, Seven Lions is on my management now. Cool.
Great.
Uh,
Yeah.
um, and then, Above and Beyond has like a yearly big show called Above and Beyond's Group Therapy. I think right now they're on like 500. So every 50 shows, they have like just a big yearly big show. And they have, it's like Above and Beyond plays, but they also have other artists that play as well, usually people from Anjunabeats. And whoever was making up the lineup had this crazy idea, like, oh, Jason Ross should go back to back with Seven Lions. Um, and I was like, how does that make sense? Okay, like we have a song together, cool, but like he's so diverse. He's like playing everything, from psytrance to dubstep to all this, and I just play trance. Like I'm just one lane, and so we figured it out. And I think from that of like creating the set together to just hanging out together. Like I would fly to Seattle to work on the set. That's like how committed I was to um to get a good set going for the show. It was just such like they live stream it. It's just a big event. Um, and the more I would hang out with him, the more we'd start talking of like, I always loved his music, but I think I was just always too in my head of like feeling afraid to like explore outside of my trance bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just talking with him and then making Ocean together, uh, just kind of open my eyes to that kind of style outside of trance, where it like, I didn't have to totally try, I didn't have to totally change up my sound to kind of make that style. It was like I could use my sound in just other tempos and rhythms and stuff like that. Um, and then he told me he's starting a label soon, and I was experimenting with like a melodic dubstep song. And he thought that that would be a great introduction for me to try something new on his new label. So I think I was the first song, or I think he had a solo that was the first song on his label, but then I was like the second release. So I think it was just such like a like good timing, but just so out of the blue. Like it just, all these puzzle pieces just kind of lined up at the right time.
That's crazy. You think if
Yeah,
one thing didn't really happen in that order, or you said no
yeah,
to the back, because I mean,
exactly.
I think we all see back to backs that in the back of our head, we're like, who the fuck thought of this kind of thing? But that's wild. I
Yeah,
definitely a right time, right place, right
yeah,
evolution
exactly.
sort of situation. And it seems like you guys are pretty close on a personal level as well. Like I feel like a very family orientation from like the whole Ophelia crew in general.
Yeah, yeah. I guess on top of that, after the back to back, he asked me to go on his bus tour, Journey to tour in 2018. So yeah, you were saying like all the puzzle pieces just happened to like just fit, and hanging out with him and getting to know him on a more personal level on the tour, on the bus tour, um, we just like became really close friends. Um, and then I guess fast forwarding to the next bit, before the pandemic, um, I think a lot of like just like the main artists, I don't know. I think like we just happened to form like a group chat. I'm sure Sam maybe told you about this, um, of just like a few of the core artists on Ophelia as just like a way of like sending songs to each other. Um, it was kind of just very casual, like, hey guys, new song out, check it out. Like, maybe give me like a thumbs up or something, or, you know, uh, so it was kind of like that. And then I think when COVID hit, we kind of used that chat as somewhat of like a crutch to like, we were all in the same boat, like all shows, vanished. And we kind of just used this chat as like uh, a life preserver of like trying to figure out like what comes next, where do we go from here, you know, offering insight of like, here's this new thing on COVID, like this, oh, vaccines. And um, it was kind of like we were just trying to navigate what to do. And Sam was in Trivecta was in the group. And um, yeah, and I think it just turned into this like really core group of people that, we're talking every day now. And I go hiking with like Wooly and Kill the Noise like every other day pretty much. Which was like a huge thing for me mentally to have that outlet of like, I know you guys aren't touring right now. Let's go on a hike. Let's talk through some things that are on our mind. Um, so it kind of just turned into a really amazing group of close friends that like will, go on trips together outside of playing shows and stuff like that. Um, yeah, but then to see, everyone grow and like, work off each other of like, holding each other up to a high standard of like, you know, wanting to make the best music we can make. It's been amazing, seeing, I think, my evolution as an artist, um, Sam's evolution, to see what he was doing 5 years ago to what he's doing now, like
Yep.
solid, really solid stuff. We actually have a collab coming out, I think, in a few weeks.
Ooh, okay.
But that's
I'm
been really
excited.
fun. Yeah. So it's just really cool to like just have that friend group that we can go to, if, I don't know, it's just been a really, really cool community that we've built. It
That's
just,
so
yeah,
like that's so like healthy. Sorry, I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt. It's so healthy that you guys have that because I think that just as much as you all are touring, you have to have something else to detach. And I think it's really hard. I mean, like significant others are like amazing and they're there for you in so many ways and they honestly all deserve like gold stars and awards and like $1 million to deal with like a touring act's like bullshit. But I sometimes think that the only people who really understand is other people who are going through the same thing and dealing with the same mental battles, whether it's physical issues, mental issues, psychological things that are going on that just happens from you sometimes being a tour mule, which happens after a very large album release or happens on a very large tour. And I think when you don't have that detachment to go hiking or like next week, my boyfriend and I are going to go snowboarding with Blanke, with JP. It's like if you don't have that opportunity to disconnect, whether it's nature or a hobby or a club sport or something that is so far from music itself, you can really, I think, one, burn out, and two, sometimes just feel lost because I've spoken with touring acts that have toured for years on end and they don't get much of a break and then they hit a wall. And if they don't take that time to really develop like outside people who can maybe hold you accountable and keep you grounded and say, hey, this is reality. Um, I think it's really hard to sustain a huge shelf life of a career.
yeah, totally. I think you definitely need to take mental breaks and even just like, even have a life outside of this world that we're in. I think if you're, if I'm living in this world 100% of the time, um, and all I think about and all I talk about is music, I don't think that really does much for me mentally. I think it's just you need to have, you know, and you're right. Like having a group of guys like this start in it with you and are living the same things and could maybe even like give you offer some advice is really helpful. But taking that a step further of like even having friends outside of music that like maybe don't even listen to this music, like um me and my girlfriend, like we go to restaurants together and like we go with friends and I always try to make sure that I'm not always 100%, just everything music, because that just, then you can come back to the studio with like a fresh mind, of
Mhm.
like, oh, I just, um, went out or I went on a trip for a couple days and I come back and I didn't do anything music related. I think there's something really healthy about that, of having those routines of, even like going to the gym and listening to a podcast. You know, um, there's a lot of benefit from having hobbies or doing things outside of the studio or outside of, looking on Twitter and looking at, just there's just so much going on uh, in life, but also in like music, that I think if you're just bogged down, if you're scrolling through Twitter and Instagram and all this stuff and looking at what this guy's doing and what that guy's doing, what that person's doing, it just doesn't seem like it's not a healthy thing. I could tell
Nope.
you just from firsthand experience, like just being in that, you know, looking through your Twitter feed and, it just, I think you somehow like you can even start to like compare yourself to other people. Like, oh, I
Oh
should
yeah.
this and that. I wish I was here. I wish I was doing that. Um, So I think having that kind of separation, I think, is really healthy. Yeah.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with everything you've just said, and you can just be consumed by it, and the consumption that leads to usually the comparison game will kill every ounce of inspiration and motivation that you have, not only in the studio but just in life in general. Like, it's going to be there tomorrow. It's okay, you don't have to post every day.
Mm-hmm.
Social media isn't the end all be all, and it's just finding that healthy balance. But I think it takes everybody a long time, because everybody's on a different journey to find the balance that is right for you and the life that you're living. And it takes mistakes and it takes ups and downs. And it makes me very happy to hear you say that, just because not only have you been doing this for a long time, it just, everyone who I speak with that, I don't know. I was speaking to Cray the other day, and she's like, you never make it. Even though people look at you and you're like, wow, you've made it. You have your own support. You have your own headline tour. You're not ever going to feel like you've ever like made it, like you're ever really content with where you're at, because you're always going to want to work for something more. But to just be able to live in the moment and say, okay, this is where I'm at. This is where I need to be. This is where I'm supposed to be. And what every other person in my lane is doing does not matter, is something that has made, my journey, and I'm sure your journey and everybody who's gotten to that point, a lot easier to sleep at night, and a lot easier to be like, hey, okay, I'm good. Stop worrying. Just keep doing what I need to be doing. Stay consistent, work hard, put your head down. As long as you don't quit, it will eventually happen. Done.
Mm.
So before I let you go, you have a collab with Trivecta with Sam dropping soon. Is there anything else you can tease for the fans for the Jason Ross project? I know you just finished a massive tour. You just finished an album. You should be like on the beach laying face down with your phone off. But is there anything that you're working on now that you're really excited that you can maybe tease for some of your listeners?
I am hitting the road soon-ish. I can't really say much about that, but I will be seeing a lot of people soon on a certain tour.
I think I know what it is, but I'm not going to say anything.
But yeah, the Trivecta one is coming out soon. I'm really excited about that.
So exciting.
It's featuring rabbits. And then also, like, I think talking about like trying these DJ tools, I am exploring something within that avenue, because I'm working on something. I think it's going to be like, maybe the summer of something that I've never really done before.
Okay.
That's all I can say, really.
Okay. But my mind's wandering. I'm like, ooh, what could this be?
There is something that I think will go back to like the Atlas live stream that I did back in the day. There is something I'm working on.
Love it.
Because a part of me, like, I loved doing the whole live stream thing. It was so fun for that moment. And I think just obviously I had to stop it because of shows were coming back. It was like, okay, I don't need to like just play a mix in front of a camera. I can play a mix in front of people again. But a part of me, and I think a lot of fans miss that. And I think there was something to where I can play music to everyone. And it's not just in the US or something. Everyone can kind of tune in. It's something I've been trying to figure out. So there's something I'm working on. And I think the DJ tools goes hand in hand with that. So it's exciting. We'll see. We'll see what comes of it.
I'm definitely going to keep an eye out. Can't wait to hear the collab. You seem like you're always pushing forward. I'm sure that we'll hear a new body of work, sooner than later. We'll have opportunities to see you on the road, and you're just going to keep pumping. Jason Ross, thank you so much for joining me today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This is
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. Yes.